Assalamu alaikum. This is Abdul Qadoos, President of Edifiers Activism, and today we are live in another episode of Youth Awakening series. And for this, we have a very special guest from America. Her name is Brittney-Nichole, and she's a motivational speaker. She's a coach, and she's so much experienced in the field of emotional intelligence. Hello, Brittney. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Abdul. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you can start with your brief introduction.
Sure. So as you said, my name is Brittney-Nichole, and I am from North Carolina, the East Coast of the States. And I am the founder of Catalyst for Change, LLC, as well as Generation EQ. Catalyst for Change focuses on working with entrepreneurs and businesses in emotional intelligence. And then Generation EQ focuses on working with children and families. So I've been doing that for about 3 years now in terms of Catalyst for Change. Generation EQ is a bit newer.
Okay, so how you started this field and what challenges you faced?
So there's a short and a long answer to that question. So I could say that it started
long.
Sure. It started when I was a child. My family was loving, but they lacked effective communication skills and how to handle their emotions effectively. And I don't think that's unique to my family. I think that's a situation we see in society, only because we've never been taught how to understand and regulate our emotions. And it's a skill set. And as I grew up, I started to have a lot of anxiety. And I assumed that it was just part of who I was. I was told that, well, it runs in the family, that it's hereditary, it's in our genes, because my mom and my grandmother and my aunt all suffered with anxiety or depression. And so I just accepted that as part of my identity. And it wasn't until I went to college for psychology that I started to play around with mindfulness and understanding that our thoughts create a reality because of this chemical release in our brains. So it's like, I wonder if I can control this. And I had been on anxiety medication since I was 15 years old. And in my early 20s, I started to have severe panic attacks that were triggered out of nowhere. And if you've ever had a panic attack, anyone who's ever had a panic attack, it feels like you're dying. And so I started to see all of these issues presented in my life and how the people that I thought were the problem, the situations that I was in that I felt was the problem, followed me whenever I moved to a different city and was in a new relationship. And I realized I'm the common factor here. So once I accepted that and became curious and started to apply what I was learning, I was able to get off my anxiety medicine. I no longer have panic attacks. And I started to realize that our emotions are meant to tell us something. There's something behind every emotion, an unmet need. And when I started to address the needs, I was able to see my emotions from an objective perspective instead of saying something's wrong with me. And then I went into the workforce and I started to see these same symptoms presenting themselves in the individuals around me. So that is when I decided to make it my mission in life to help others to understand and regulate their emotions and be very self-compassionate about it and not feel guilty for having the feelings that we feel.
Okay, so what kind of meditation you had on that time?
The medication I was on?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't quite recall. It wasn't Prozac, but it was some type of anti-anxiety medicine when I was 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how you started and how you choose the field of emotional intelligence?
It was just kind of self-discovery. I started reading a lot of books And I stumbled upon, I mean, after about 30 books in, I ran across Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. And I started to really see like all of these parallels to my life. And I was like, oh, wow, we were really never taught this thing called emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, understanding our emotions, what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, the underlying need, having an accurate perception of how we're perceived by others, and then how to regulate those emotions. So now that we know what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, how can we alter that state into a more positive and productive state? And then being aware of the people around us, realizing that our perspective is just one small speck of reality, right? Instead of
Yeah.
thinking that the world revolves around us and that our truths are absolute. And then being able to empathize with other people. We may not have experienced their exact experiences, but we can relate to what they have felt within those moments because our feelings are universal. So that's the
Okay.
umbrella of emotional intelligence.
Okay. So, in my knowledge, the Daniel Goleman just found this field of emotional intelligence. So, how you see the world changed after his contributions?
So Daniel Goleman is very well known for emotional intelligence, but he actually isn't the founder of emotional intelligence,
Okay.
which was surprising to me. So he was doing some research on two other psychologists, John Mayer and Peter Salovey, back in the early 90s. And then from their research, he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence. I
Okay.
think that it's starting to be picked up in organizations now. It's a buzzword. People hear the term emotional intelligence and they've heard it before, but not everybody understands exactly what it means. But I do think people, especially during this pandemic, are starting to see the importance of being in control of our emotions because we realize we can't control the situation we're in, but our emotions we do have control over.
Okay. So, how can we manage our emotions?
The first thing is to identify what we're feeling. We have a very limited vocabulary for our emotions. Anger, sadness, happiness, joy, frustration, but it doesn't go too far beyond that. Whenever someone says, I'm angry, it could be something else that they're feeling. For example, they could be feeling despair, and that despair leads to those similar feelings of anger. And if we don't know how to appropriately label those feelings, what we're feeling, then we can address them in the wrong way. So I would say first, developing that self-awareness. There's some great resources out there that has a list of all these emotions we can feel and the spectrum of those emotions. So things can be very mild all the way to very intense on that scale of emotions with each feeling. So identifying that. Then once you've identified that, finding the need behind that emotion. And that's when regulation starts to happen. So this takes rational thinking. It takes us being in a state of uh, ability to problem solve. But when we're feeling intense emotions, we are in no place to think clearly because we're in the emotional part of the brain. And that kind of shuts down our cortex where we have to think. So that's a little bit of a dilemma, right? If you're trying to regulate a very strong emotion, how do you do that if you can't rationally think and bring yourself down to a state? So, one thing to keep in mind is to breathe. Take in very long, deep breaths because that regulates the autonomic nervous system. It brings us from a state of heightened emotional arousal down to a calmer state. And once we can regulate that and get out of that fight or flight response, that survival mode, then we can start to calm ourselves down and think about what we should do instead of reacting on impulse. So I would say
Okay.
breathing techniques are a great step.
Okay. So, how can we how can we adopt the habit of empathy instead of sympathy?
So we like to say, at least in Western culture, I don't know about your culture, but we often say, I understand. When somebody is trying to tell us something, we say, I understand. Oftentimes we don't understand. So to empathize with someone, ask them what they are feeling, because sympathy is knowing their situation and saying, man, I really feel sorry for you. That's awful. But we don't often feel or share that feeling with them. So instead of just hearing the situation that they're experiencing, ask them, how does that make you feel? And when they start to label those emotions, I feel anxious, I feel frustrated, I feel helpless. We have all, in some area of our life, felt helpless and anxious and sad. We've all had these feelings. We share that common feeling. And taking ourselves to a place where we've had that feeling, then we can start to empathize with them. But I think we should start to take that term, I understand, out of our vocabulary. Because if we really have felt that, we don't need to say we understand, because oftentimes we don't.
Okay, so how much the emotional intelligence influenced the life of a leader?
Can you repeat that one? Sorry, I
I'm
didn't
saying,
catch that.
okay, I'm saying that how much the emotional intelligence factor influenced the life of a leader.
It influences it on many different levels. Studies have shown that organizations that are led by leaders that have high emotional intelligence are far more profitable. They have greater employee engagement, retention. Um, there is more of a dynamic of collective thought. So, leaders who lead with emotional intelligence are usually the last to speak because they listen first and they understand the value that everyone in the organization brings and all the perspectives. And it's called servant leadership. And you are truly wanting to serve your organization, your stakeholders, your customers. And it's a more holistic approach instead of just looking at your people as a means to an end. So there's so many benefits to that, and also your personal life. Because if you are an entrepreneur or you own a large business or you're a CEO of a large organization, sometimes it's hard to differentiate the time that you need to spend with your family, the time you need to take for yourself, and the time that you need to be involved in your organization. And so being able to bring EQ not just to your organization, but in all dimensions of your life, it'll improve all aspects of that.
Okay, how much it differs with the IQ?
So IQ is innate, right? Most of us have a set, and when I say set, it does fluctuate several points. But most of us cap out on IQ around 25. Whereas in EQ is a skill set. So EQ is something that needs to be developed, which intelligence can be developed as well, but it doesn't fluctuate as much. So it's can be seen as connected, but it's really not connected. It's a little complicated. There's a lot of research around that. But someone can have an extremely high IQ and be a genius, but have a very low EQ. But they can also build that EQ up. And if you take EQ and apply it with IQ, there's so much you can do. You could change the world, right? Because you have the intelligence with being able to understand and empathize and take other people's feelings into account and not project your feelings onto others, be more productive, all of these things. And also emotional intelligence, as we were talking about before, whenever we have these heightened states of emotions, we're not able to think clearly. So if you're a very intelligent person, but you're experiencing high levels of stress, you're not going to be able to utilize your IQ. it's actually going to lower your IQ for that moment because you're not able to problem solve and think. And that's the beauty of bringing those two together.
Okay, so how can we enhance or polish our emotional intelligence?
Yeah, again, it starts with awareness. I think self-awareness is the foundation, right? And having self-compassion, because in this journey of building our emotional intelligence, it's like we have to break down and then build back up. Because we have to, in this process, identify our own personal weaknesses and shortfalls. And that can be extremely difficult for us to do because we don't want to see ourselves in a negative light. And our ego can hold us back from that. But once we're able to see things from a very objective point of view, instead of judging ourselves, instead of, beating up on ourselves, if you will, saying, that's okay, I'm going to improve. But at first, I have to accept that here are my shortcomings, here are my flaws, and here is how I can improve on those. None of us can be the best at everything, right? So we have to find our strengths and build on those, and then be humble enough to rely on others who have those other strengths. That's the beauty of working together in a collective society, is we don't have to be great at everything. We don't have to know everything. And I think that comes with that self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
Okay, in emotional intelligence, self-awareness and self-realization and self-discovery is important. So how can we do these processes?
Having an accurate perception of yourself is a great place to start as well. So 95% of people think that they are self-aware. That's a problem because only 15% are accurate in that perception. So when I'm telling you, you need to develop self-awareness, well, if 95% of the population says, well, I have self-awareness, how do you know whether you do or you don't? And a great way to find that out is asking your peers. Now, this can be extremely difficult for people to do because a lot of people don't want to hurt our feelings. They don't want to be honest with us. We could maybe have a negative feeling if they are honest with us, and then it leads to a whole other problem with, breaking relationships and friendships, so on and so forth. But I would recommend finding a way to get honest feedback from your peers and from a collective group, because there's always going to be outliers, meaning there's always going to be people that are projecting their insecurities onto you and they're saying, oh, you're a terrible person. So you need to collect from a larger group of people. I would say at least ask 10 to 15 people how they feel about you, and pick areas that you want to develop. So how am I at listening? How am I at communicating? How am I at being a leader? These are the things that are important to me. And you ask them and have them rate you on a scale of 1 to 10. And if possible, have them send this to you anonymously, whether it's writing you a note and sending it to you without any name. That way they can be honest with you. You don't know who it's coming from. And then start to look at the commonalities. So if you surveyed 10 to 15 people, and out of that pool of people, 7 or 8 of them are saying that you are, a fantastic leader, and 3 of them are saying, oh, you're not a fantastic leader, then I would go with the 7, go with the majority. But surveying people is a great way to start to develop that self-awareness. And then you know what you need to work on.
Okay, so how can we analyze the things in a good way? Most of the people most of the people reacts before analyzing the things, and that's the most people facing the problem. So how can we analyze the things?
How can you analyze the feedback that you're receiving from people? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, that can be difficult for someone who doesn't have emotional intelligence yet. So that's where you have to check in with yourself before you get this feedback and say, how am I going to react if it is not what I want to hear? And why am I reaching out for this feedback? Is it to confirm what I already believe to be true about myself, or is it to really genuinely grow? And being in that right mindset and being honest with yourself. And again, self-compassion, realizing that it's okay. This isn't a personal attack on you. Our behaviors are not who we are. Our behaviors can change. So detaching that from our identity is a great way to start analyzing this data and not take it as a personal attack on us if it's not what we want to hear.
Okay, so most of the people don't want to listen the others, and how much the role of good communication in emotional intelligence?
Oh gosh, communication is everything. Communication is everything. And it starts with how we communicate with ourselves. So what is that inner voice in our head telling us about ourselves and telling us about the world around us? Because that is how we're going to interpret information that we are receiving. And that's also how we're going to communicate to others. So I call it Swiss cheese communication. If you've ever seen a slice of Swiss cheese, there are a bunch of holes in it, right? And that's how our communication is. It's oftentimes not solid. So having emotional intelligence, we're able to fill in those holes before we communicate. And we're also able to ask for clarification from a person who is communicating to us so that we do not automatically fill in the gaps in their communication. So, for example, a peanut butter jelly sandwich, or just say that you're making a sandwich in general. I've had people write instructions to how to make a sandwich. So it's this is often how it goes. Take 2 slices of bread, spread the peanut butter on one side, spread the jelly on the other, put it together and eat. Simple, right? But what if somebody has never made a peanut butter jelly sandwich before, doesn't know how to make a sandwich? There are many things that you left out. For example, if you have a bag of sliced bread, first you have to open the bag. Then you have to twist open the jars to the peanut butter and twist open the jar to the jelly. You need a knife or a spoon to take that out. When you spread it on the bread, are you spreading it on both sides or one side? So there's all of these little bits of information that we're assuming the other person already knows how to do. And so that is missing in our communication. And that can cause immense problems. Also, we tend to communicate our emotions and not the need or the message behind the emotion. So if I am angry, let's say that you have a roommate, you're living with someone that's very messy and you are a neat person. So you may come home one day and you've had a really rough day at school or at work, and they just have a mess everywhere all over the house. And instead of saying, I've had a really tough day, and seeing this mess is adding to my anxiety, and I would really appreciate it if you would clean this up to kind of help me manage this anxiety that I'm feeling. Would that be okay? We often don't approach it that way. We often come in, see the mess, start this negative narrative in our heads like, you don't respect me. You're a terrible person. How dare you? You should know better. And then whenever we talk to them, they say, you're so lazy. You're such a pig. You're blah, blah, blah. And all we're doing is projecting that emotion. And that's why having emotional intelligence and being able to communicate effectively is key. I know that was a long answer, but I hope that gave some good examples of communication in relation to emotional intelligence.
Okay, so how can we manage our anger? Is anger played an important role in emotional intelligence?
So it is okay to feel anger. It is okay to feel any emotion we have. It is not okay to project that onto other people. So that's the difference. When people hear that you're an emotionally intelligent person, they think, oh, well, you must have all these pleasant emotions and you must never get angry or irate or frustrated or outraged. And that's not true. It's all about how we manage that anger. So I call it whenever we don't know how to manage our emotions, then we can project that, and I call it emotional shrapnel. And it's like a grenade is being released at other people, and our emotions are just flying at them, because emotions are energy in motion. That's what emotion is energy in motion. And so we need to contain that, not suppress it, because it's going to manifest within us if we just suppress that. And then that can turn into physical illnesses. So it's again about seeing that emotion from an objective perspective. I am feeling extremely angry. Why am I feeling this way? Then you trace that back to why. Then you address why, whether it's what someone said to you, whether it's a situation that occurred, and say, okay, so I'm feeling angry about this situation. How can I manage this emotion effectively? Maybe it's a need that needs to be met. If someone is not hearing you, then you can get angry and say, look, I know you say that you hear me, but you're really not catching what I'm saying, and it's really making me angry. So I need you to understand that while you feel like you understand what I'm saying, you're not, and I need you to listen. And you can't control other people. If someone else is making you angry or influencing that feeling, you may not be able to change them. And that's where you have to say, am I going to allow this situation or this person to make me feel this way? And what should I do about it next? And each situation is different. So it's hard for me to advise on that. But it's all about addressing the root cause and not letting that anger get out of control.
Okay, so we can't control the others people, but how can we understand and manage the others emotions?
We can't manage their emotions, but we can influence their emotions. So
Okay.
making sure that they are feeling heard. In my book, The EQ Deficiency, I have a chapter called Devillainizing the Villain, because oftentimes whenever someone is acting in our eyes inappropriately or having these negative, let me reverse that. There are no negative feelings. Unpleasant feelings are very strong emotions. We can start to see them and their character as being that set personality, right? Like they're just a terrible person, and they're not. So then we have to figure out, why might they be upset, or why might they be feeling this feeling? And sometimes they don't know, because again, if we don't have emotional intelligence, we often don't know how to properly identify what we're feeling or why we're feeling it. We oftentimes just address the symptom, such as, well, you did this and this is why I feel this way. But there's something deeper to that. So being able to question and ask and help them find the root cause is really important. Instead of telling them they shouldn't feel a certain way, or that wasn't what really happened, or they are acting ridiculous, or they are crazy. We oftentimes like to throw these labels out there. Like, you need to calm down. Have you ever been told that? If you're feeling upset, you need to calm down. Well, what does that do? It has the reverse effect. It makes us even more angry and more frustrated, because someone's telling us what we need to do. So if we're on the opposite end of that, instead of telling someone to calm down, say, I see you're extremely upset right now. Do you want to talk about it, or do you need time to relax and cool down a bit? Because sometimes that's not the best time to approach them. So it's really analyzing the situation and figuring out, is this the appropriate time to address that person's needs? Not making it about us, not taking things as a personal attack. Because if we do that, we're going to be defensive. We're going to approach them in a hostile way. And then it just escalates from there. So it's all about being empathetic, not taking things personally, and helping others find the root cause.
Okay, so what are the exact factors which influence the emotional intelligence in a positive or a negative way?
Oh gosh, there's so many, I mean, there's so many factors, and it can be multiple things. So
You can
that's
explain
a really
few.
hard question. I'm sorry?
I'm saying that you can explain the few factors.
Um, so for example, mm, it could be insecurity. It could be personal insecurity. It could be the way that we were brought up. We're in a very competitive society where we feel like we have to be the best at everything. And so falling prey to that, allowing ourselves to um, be part of these social norms can create extreme pressure on us, and we become more defensive, which leads to low emotional intelligence. When someone has high emotional intelligence, they're able to break away from that social script of this is how I should act, this is how I should look. They're like, no, that's not reality. No one can be number one at everything. No one can be number one at anything. There's always going to be someone who does something better than you. So I think we have to start seeing life from a different perspective. We need to see ourselves as just one piece of a gigantic puzzle in the universe, and asking, what do we bring to the table? Instead of putting the spotlight on us, realizing this is what I have to offer. And again, realizing that, our parents, if they weren't taught emotional intelligence, they can't teach us emotional intelligence. So again, that's a large question. I mean, it's a lot to dissect. Yeah, that's hard. That's a hard one for me to answer in such a short amount of time because there's so many factors at play.
Okay, so there's a question from the audience, and Hina Sharif is asking that our behavior and emotions affects our intelligence.
Oh, that's a great question. And yes, it can. Like I was saying before, if we are experiencing emotions that make us feel like we are in that fight or flight mode that engage our sympathetic nervous system, it does shut down the rational part of the brain and we're not able to problem solve. So if you've ever given a speech in front of an audience and you know exactly what you are going to say, you know the topic well, very well, but then you get up in front of people and you lose all train of thought, you forget everything that you were going to say. That right there shows that it's our emotional hijacking. It's that emotional part of the brain that's taking control and shutting down that ability to think clearly and problem solve. So yes, if we are experiencing high levels of anxiety and stress in our daily lives frequently, then that affects our performance. And it does influence our intelligence and our IQ. Yeah.
Okay, it will surely help her. So there's one more question from the Saira Zulfikar. She's saying that, man, you are saying that only 15% people are accurate in their perception. All right, but everyone has its own perceptions. So how should we say that it's only 15%? All right, ones, because perception is not wrong according to every person.
So, perception is not wrong in terms of how we view the world necessarily, but we can gauge with accuracy how self aware we are. So, the way that they manage this study is they ask people, do you feel like you are self-aware? Meaning, do you understand yourself, how other people perceive you, and identify your emotions? That is something that we can measure. And the way that they measured this is just the way that I was telling you about gauging the perception of others, how others view you. So if we are truly self-aware, then the way that we perceive ourselves and the way others perceive us are going to fit hand in hand. They're going to look exactly the same. So I feel like I'm a very strong leader. Others feel like I'm a very strong leader. Same thing. So the way that they measured this is if someone says, I feel like I'm a very strong leader, then they interviewed a large group of their peers and their peers are saying, no, they're a terrible leader, then that shows that we're lacking in self-awareness. So that is how we measure self-awareness. It's not so much as our perception of reality, but the accuracy of our perception of ourselves and how other people perceive us. And that's how they measure that.
Okay, so there's one more question from the audience, and it's a long question, I think. Nimra Ashraf is saying that if we survey with people, they might judge us according to their own views. For most of the introverts, people don't know a lot about their EQ since they don't interact with, that much. So how can we let them judge us according to their own perception? Their views about us might be the reflection of their perspective, not of truth inside.
That's really true. I am naturally an introvert myself. I'm now more in the public because of being a speaker and things of that nature, but I am definitely at heart an introvert. And when I was in grade school, I was often labeled as stuck up or a snob because I was to myself. I didn't talk to other people. So that is very true that some people can see an introvert and mislabel them. But I do think if you were asking people about your team efforts, introverts can still be very productive in a team. They may not give the same way that an extrovert would. So they may not be seen as the team leader, but you can still be very productive and extremely valuable to a team. So instead of asking someone, am I outgoing, or asking about your personal self, you can say, do you feel like I am a productive team member? And then ask them about that component. My husband is also an introvert, and so he's more of a listener than a speaker. So it's all about how you ask the right questions and what you're looking to get out of it. But yeah, you cannot expect people to give you information on things that they do not know because they may inaccurately perceive you, for sure.
Okay, so if a person is emotionally strong, so how he handles the destructive criticism or a constructive criticism?
So that's a great question. I love that. When people give you feedback, it's oftentimes based on their experience, their perception, their beliefs. So again, when I ask for criticism from people, so my book is coming out in September.
Best
And
of
I
luck.
sent my book, I'm sorry.
Best of luck
Oh,
from
thank
my
you.
side.
Thank you. So I sent my book out to a number of people to read prior to its release to get their feedback. Everybody has their own feedback. But again, with any type of data or research, the larger the pool of people or the larger the data pool, the more accurately you can perceive that information because you start to see the majority versus the outliers, right? So, can you ask that question again? Because my train of thought just went with that, and I completely forgot the question, the original question.
I'm saying that if a person is emotionally strong, so
Yes,
how he handles the
the
things of
criticism.
a criticism.
Yes. So that's where you have to realize that people are going to provide you that criticism based on sometimes their beliefs, their experiences, and what they think they should do. So whenever you are taking that criticism, be aware of that as well, but also say, I'm getting this feedback so I can grow and develop. Because without that feedback, if we think we're great, we're the best thing, then we're just going to stay stagnant. We're never going to progress in life. So, for example, I don't have my original or my new book now, but the very first cover of my book, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was the best thing ever. And my close friends and family were like, that is beautiful. That is fantastic. That is lovely. But then I started to ask people outside of my bubble what they thought. And they said, I do not like that cover. I do not like the color. And I took that personally at first because I put a lot of work into that. But then I said, this is my audience. This is who I want reading my book. And if they don't like it, then I need to tweak it. And so, again, seeing it not as a personal attack, but as an area to develop and learn is the best way to approach criticism.
Okay, it's all clear now. There's one more question from the audience, and Malaika Salim is asking that does emotional intelligence has impact in our time? We can say the time management factor.
Yes, because part of emotional intelligence is motivation, and having that intrinsic motivation, it prevents us from getting sidetracked. So if we become taken away from our activities or a productive situation and procrastinate by getting on our phones or going to get a cup of coffee, so we're starting to procrastinate. Emotional intelligence says, I'm procrastinating. Why am I procrastinating? Why do I not want to do this task? And think through that process and say, I'm putting this off because it's hard work and I'm trying to avoid that, but it needs to get done. So I need to start to do it. I need to put my phone away, put it far away from me so that doesn't distract me, and focus on this. What is the outcome of this project? Then we start to ask ourselves, why are we doing this to begin with? Well, because I want this result. So then picturing that result, that end result to that project, gives us that motivation that we need to get going. So it does help us become aware of how we're spending our time and effectively manage that time as well.
Okay, if we want to be strong emotionally, we have to be more social.
What do you mean by more social?
I mean, interacting with more people.
Not necessarily. I mean, you could be an introvert and very emotionally intelligent and not around a big crowd all the time. No, you don't have to be around people. But when you are around people being emotionally intelligent, you're able to pick up on their cues. You're able to read their body language, be aware of their situation and empathize with them. But you don't necessarily have to, put yourself out there more, be around more people to be emotionally intelligent.
Okay, so if any person is emotional intelligent, so how he manages staff if he's a team leader or a organization CEO?
Being a good listener, having effective communication, taking that feedback from everyone around them and not taking it personal, realizing that the whole part of being a leader is to support other people, lift them up instead of push them down. Unfortunately, there are leaders who build themselves up by putting other people down, and they rule by fear, and they lack humility and empathy. So being an emotionally intelligent leader is being there for your team members and your employees and ensuring that their needs are being met and their feelings are being heard, but also being able to direct in a positive way. Because oftentimes people will refuse to do certain things or avoid certain things. So we can't be too slack as a leader. That doesn't mean allowing them to get away with whatever they want, but that means that whenever you feel that resistance within your team, being able to address it in appropriate ways and then give them the motivation and the encouragement that they need to perform at that level that you need them to.
Okay, if any person wants to earn the respect of others, he have to be emotionally intelligent.
I think it's important. I think that emotional intelligence plays into respect largely, I think there's a difference between respect and popularity, right? There's a lot of celebrities that are extremely popular that people idolize and look up to. But as soon as they do something, they lose all credibility. So I think they lack that respect. So, yeah, I think that if you are a humble person, if you are someone who is honest with others and has that integrity, you do have a level of emotional intelligence. And I think that does gain you respect from others.
Okay, okay. So there's one more question from the audience, and Sundar Rajput is asking that what are the key elements of emotional intelligence?
Self awareness, self regulation, internal motivation, social awareness, and empathy. Those are the elements of emotional intelligence.
Okay. How can we motivate ourselves?
Ask yourself honestly, what do I want out of life? What is the person who do I want to be? What is the person that I want others to see in the world? And ask yourself these questions, but take away the component of what does society want me to be? Because if we start to do things just because we feel like that's what we should do, then we're not going to truly embody and embrace that persona. It's going to be very surface level. And that's the problem in our society today is that so many things are surface level. So then when we have those very extreme emotions and intense emotions, all of that goes out the window and then we just react. But if we embody that and we are experiencing those very strong emotions, then we're able to ground ourselves and not react on impulse.
Okay. So as you said in the starting that you face many things like anxiety and the panic attacks. So how can a person overcome the anxiety or a panic attacks or a stress?
I think everybody has their own way of dealing with certain things. For me, it was being mindful. For me, it was having self compassion, realizing I'm not a bad person. I'm not a crazy person. All of these labels that were being placed on me by other people, saying, no, I'm not. I am feeling these things and I don't know how to manage these things. So now I have to learn how to manage them and how to find the root cause and be objective. And I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but it really does go back to being objective, detaching yourself, your identity from your behavior, and focusing on how to gain control of that behavior.
Okay. So how can we build our positive mindset or positive approach?
I've already said self awareness, but again, I mean, who do you want to be? And starting with that, and again, self awareness and then regulation. It's it's a pretty it's a simple methodology, it's a simple model, but it's hard to do because when I coach people, there's people that I coach that are very aware of what they should do. And they have immense amounts of information that they've digested on how they should do it. But application is different than having the information. That's the difficult part. So I think taking that step, getting out of our comfort zone and making that transition from awareness to application, it's the hardest part. But once we get there, everything else just kind of takes off and it's liberating. But you have to get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable.
Okay, okay. So, is there any role of a coach or a counselor or a trainer to make a person emotionally intelligent?
Having a coach definitely helps. They can help walk you through your feelings and help guide you through the process. Um, I didn't have a coach when I went through this myself. So it took about 7 years to get to where I am now on my own. So if you have someone that that is a coach, I would highly recommend it. There's a difference between a coach and an advisor. I would
Yeah.
stay away from people who want to give you advice because they're going to give you advice based on their experiences and perceptions, and it may not be what you need.
Yeah.
So
Most of the people are the advisors.
exactly, 100%. And a coach is there for you, and they guide you through your life and what works for you. It's not about them. That's the key difference between a coach and someone giving you advice.
Okay. So here is one more question, and Sundar Rajput is again asking that how can we measure or assume the emotional intelligence? How can
So
we measure the level of emotional intelligence?
there's quite a few tests out there. The one that I prefer, Psychology Today. So if you go to psychologytoday.com and look for emotional intelligence test, they have I think it's a fantastic emotional intelligence test. It's 146 questions. And at the end, they give you a very detailed report on your emotional intelligence. They give you a free version. And then if you want to pay, it's like, I think $10 US. You can get the full report. But even the free version gives you enough so you can gauge the baseline of your emotional intelligence. So I would
Okay.
recommend checking that out. I can send you a message and you can put it in the chat
Okay.
if you want
Sure.
later.
Sure. So, is there any other way to manage, or is there any other way to measure the emotional intelligence by our own?
If you're not emotionally intelligent, it's really hard to gauge that,
Okay. So, if I
right?
am,
Because there's so many factors. Um, it's such a broad spectrum, but I would say again, if you have an accurate perceptions, if you get the feedback from others and it aligns with the way you perceive yourselves, then and if people say that you're a very empathetic person, that you're a good listener, if you do not react in situations, if you look at things from a very objective perspective, if someone is coming at you with their emotions and their anger and you do not take it personally and you stay calm in that situation, then those are signs that you are an emotionally intelligent person. If you are able to collect your thoughts before you speak, if you are able to communicate effectively, all of those are signs of high emotional intelligence.
okay. And Hina Sharif is saying that, what do you think? Our emotional person is more progressive and successful, or intelligent one?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, so, studies have shown that someone with high emotional intelligence, let's say they have an average IQ, but they have high emotional intelligence, they've been known to outperform individuals with high IQ, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe this is the accurate account, by 127%. Outperform someone with that has a high EQ. I'm sorry, someone with a high EQ can outperform someone with just a high IQ by 127%. Now, if that person is extremely intelligent and also has EQ, obviously they're going to outperform. But yes, you can outperform someone with a high IQ if you have emotional intelligence.
Okay. And Shamim Rafiq is asking that, how can we rebuild the emotional intelligence of a person who has just experienced a traumatic event?
You may not need to necessarily rebuild emotional intelligence. You can have experienced a traumatic event and still be a highly emotionally intelligent person. Having stress, anxiety, trauma in your life does not deplete the level of emotional intelligence you have. It's all about how you handle that trauma in that situation in your life. So I wouldn't say that you necessarily need to rebuild emotional intelligence.
Okay. And Saira Sulfar is asking that, I see many emotional intelligence test videos on YouTube. Is they are right, or not? There are some pictures, and we are able to select them, and then points are added. So how tell? how they tell us which type of person I am and my total points.
Yeah. So, because there's no necessarily standardized test for EQ, a lot of people are creating tests for EQ out there. The validity of all of those tests, I don't know how valid they all are or how accurate they all are. I would be very careful with taking tests that have just a few questions or don't have a lot of research backing them. That's why I recommended Psychology Today, because Psychology Today is an actual source in the science of psychology. There's also another one that Daniel Goleman's organization created. But I would be very careful with the types of tests that you are taking that say that they rate your emotional intelligence.
Okay, is there any role of emotional intelligence in our success?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Again, it increases our performance, it increases our ability to collaborate, it increases our overall well being. Another study done by Talent Smart in 2009. Now, granted, this is in US dollars, but they interviewed 42,000 individuals across various industries and measured their emotional intelligence. And they found that individuals with a high emotional intelligence made an average of 29,000 US dollars more a year than those with low emotional intelligence. And they estimated that for every point of emotional intelligence, that increased by $1,300 per point of raising your EQ. So you can also make more money by having high emotional intelligence because it's so desired in organizations. It saves organizations money because of the risk they're taking with people who may make irrational decisions or impulsive decisions in an organization or have harassment lawsuits on them. They don't have to worry about that with someone that has high emotional intelligence. So there's many
Okay,
benefits to that.
okay. Role of a good? Is there any role of a body language of a person in emotional intelligence?
They're more composed. They don't lash out as much. You won't see eye rolling. Like nobody's going to, do that if they're emotionally intelligent. But they're more composed in the way that they interact with you. They, the crossed arms thing. Like I cross my arms sometimes, but it's all about like if you're having a communication with me and I don't agree with you. If I'm emotionally intelligent, I will just nod, take in what you're saying. But if I'm not emotionally intelligent and I disagree with you, I'm just like, you know, ah, you know. So you don't see those same strong reactions of disrespect and the animation that comes with those intense emotions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Brittany. So how you experienced that session?
Oh, it was wonderful. I love the questions, the engagement from the audience. I love the way your display looks. That's very professional. I like that. Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much for joining us. And this was a wonderful session. And you showed the knowledge you have, and you shared the views of emotional intelligence you have. And that was very informative. So thank you so much. I hope you will join us in more sessions like this on another topic. So thank you so much for having
Thank you, Abdul.
us, and
It was my
Allah
pleasure.
Hafiz.
It was my
Allah
pleasure.
Hafiz.
Thank you.